How's it going, y'all? Aiden Anderson here with Moscow Report. I had the privilege recently to sit down with Latah County Commissioner Tom Lamar and talk to him about what the county has been up to this past month and what we as citizens can be paying attention to for the future. Let's get into it. Tom, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks for being here, Aiden.
I guess I'll kick things off with
Sure.
What has the county been up to this past month?
Many things. So we have a lot of work in any given meeting that we have. We have many topics that we cover. So we oftentimes have alcohol, beer, wine license. We have tax exemptions. Mostly those are completed for the year, although there are things that pop up every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
With the end of June upon us, we're entering into Board of Equalization, and we had a lot of Board of Equalization appeals this past week, and we have more next week and following. So those are coming up. We've addressed the issue with the jail infrastructure. An issue that the sheriff made a decision on that we supported, and so there are a lot of issues like that. We have other facility issues that we're constantly working on too. We're in the process right now of authorizing the combination of the DMV and Department of Licensing between the two elected officials. So state of Idaho requires the assessor to be in charge of one of those offices and the sheriff in charge of the other offices, even though they're state agencies essentially, and then the two locals are in charge. So anyway, we're working to make that more efficient so that the user experience is more complete and efficient and functional when they come in to get, say, a driver's license and a motor vehicle registration. So lots of things.
No, indeed. And I have to say, I've yet to hear a complaint about the Moscow DMV, but it's also good to hear that you're still working on improving it in what ways you can.
It's a great facility. You know, we feel honored to be able to have that space and make it work. But you know, it's also a state agency, not our agency. But yeah,
of course. I want to ask you a little bit more about the Board of Equalization. You know, that's an interesting part of the county system that people have to go through in relation to stuff that people care a lot about, namely their property, their taxes, that sort of thing.
That's right.
Do you mind unpacking the process of what that looks like a little bit more?
Sure. The assessor is required to do an assessment of all the properties within the county by a certain date within Idaho code. That's been completed, and then the assessment notices go out to everybody to say, hey, this is what your property is valued at. People have a short window of time as per Idaho code to be able to appeal that assessment if they don't like it. And some people connect a property assessment with how much they think they're going to pay in property taxes, and so that ends up increasing the number of people that might appeal their assessment. I think a lot of people though learn that there's not necessarily a very good correlation between the assessment and how much they're going to pay in property taxes. For example, if their value goes up 20%, their property taxes are not going to go up 20%. There's not that kind of a connection. The assessment is a requirement, of course, by Idaho state law, and that has to be done throughout the whole county over a 5-year period of time. So sometimes, because we're doing it in increments of, say, 20% of the county in every 1 year, there ends up being these bigger bumps in some cases, because it's all driven by recent market activity. It's all market based. It's not like the assessor's not coming in saying, I want to raise more money for my county, whatever that county is.
Right.
I'm going to go do this thing. That's not how it works. It's entirely based on the market that we have in our county or in any other county in the state of Idaho. So then if somebody doesn't like their assessment, their first option is to appeal it to the Board of County Commissioners sitting as the Board of Equalization. So our job in that role is to take off our commissioner hat, put on our Board of Equalization hat, and look at the facts that are presented to us by the assessor and the facts that are presented to us by the appellant. And it's entirely fact-based. The burden of proof is on the appellant. So if somebody feels their property doesn't have the value that they think it should have, they have to prove it to that Board of Equalization. And then the Board of Equalization is sitting to make sure that every property within the county is treated fairly. And so it's a long process of training of the commissioners, but then also the training assessors and so forth. And we've all been to numerous trainings to be able to help the process along.
And it seems like with the Board of Equalization items that were dealt with this week, it was relatively straightforward in the sense that, correct me if I'm mischaracterizing
that's
this,
fine.
but it seems like, the assessor's office reviewed the property based on the appeal and were able to find some ways in which, in fact, the initial assessment wasn't quite correct. We have the facts to show that, and then it was a relatively straightforward decision for you guys.
Right, all the ones this last week were very easy to make because as the appellant came into the assessor's office to say, hey, what is this? My property isn't worth this thing. And then there's an opportunity for a conversation between the property owner and the assessor. They can go look at the property, they can talk about the property, they can go through the whole process of learning about the specifics of that property, and then the assessor can say, you know what, you're right, we're going to do this thing, we're going to make this change. And so in every one of the cases, we had 7 last week, every one of those, they were able to say, we're going to make this adjustment. So the assessor came to us saying, we would like to make this adjustment, and the appellant agrees with our feelings. So at least in those cases, the property owner and the assessor agreed in advance to what it should be. So they were bringing that to us. We still have the ability to say, well, we don't agree with you two agreeing with each other. We're going to do it our own way. We have that ability, but in all the cases, we were given enough evidence that it made sense.
That makes sense. And then at that point, they've already had the conversation. You're not dealing with having to hash out as many new details in the moment right there and
exactly. And it's not always that easy. I mean, sometimes people agree and then we ask questions and things might change or whatever, but we'll as we go in the next few weeks, we'll probably have more decisions that are less agreed upon in advance. And people might say, hey, I really think this is wrong or whatever. I think, it's a funny thing for me always, because I think it's a good thing when your property value goes up, because it's an investment that we have as property owners that we want to make sure that, hey, this thing is going to continue to increase in value. If it goes the other way, that's far worse. If your property value is declining over time, that is not a good sign. And so in terms of making an investment, you don't want that. And so it's kind of an irony that it triggers some people to raise questions, but perhaps it's good for the property owner and the assessor to have really good, honest conversations about property values. And so that's good too. So I think it's good for people to be engaged in the process.
That is something I'm always interested in, seeing how we can be more engaged with the process that actually goes on. I think, for example, of the public hearings that happened this past week, and the huge amount of public input we all received on.
Nobody showed up, and even when it went before the previous, the planning or zoning commission, those decisions that came forward, they took no testimony there either. Nobody came, and I think it's the nature of what was being presented, and one of the issues was, hey, the state of Idaho changed the boundary of Latah County and 5 other counties this last year. I mean, we all agreed to it, but there were slight changes to line up the boundary with the closest monument, steel monuments in the ground along that line. And so because of that change, those new properties that came into the county had to be given certain zoning designations. And so it was a kind of a, housekeeping kind of thing to do, but it was important and we needed to get it done. But it's just one of those take time kind of things, and perhaps boring for people, and people don't show up for those.
Well, I suppose even if members of the public came in overwhelming numbers and said, we don't want this to happen,
Yeah.
or even if we really do want this to happen, because the change took place at the state level, there's really not much of a choice that you guys have, I imagine. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you would be able to say, actually, state of Idaho, none of our people want the border change.
Yeah, I mean, we joked a few years ago, the group of commissioners that were involved, it's actually gone through, this has affected 3 different groups of commissioners that I've worked with, and at Latah County, and then plus 5 other counties, as I mentioned, because the line, this is all back when, the original boundary on that line was based on a rock at an intersection of 2 rivers, and that's changed by now. So, that was in the 1880s. So that's been a while, and so anyway, the joke was, nobody wanted to be the commissioner that was giving away land from Latah County, and so, it was a fun thing that Dave McGraw liked to talk about. Dick Walser was always concerned about it too, but we could see the reasoning among the surveyor from our county and other surveyors saying, hey, this will be easier someday in the future if that property ever gets developed. And speaking of development of that property, the other thing we had to do this week was change snow load ratings for roofs on, in those areas. And so there were things like that, because it's the furthest eastern part of Latah County, it also gets the highest amount of snow. And so we want to make sure that we're not putting in buildings that don't have the proper rating. So that's part of what we did. It's not really one of those things that drives a lot of people into the courthouse.
No, fair enough. I've yet to meet a person who would be that excited about snow loads.
Yeah, it's not the biggest thing, but when they have to get a building engineered, then and it costs more money, that's when people care about it.
Well, one thing that people have definitely been reaching out to me a little bit about is the whole jail situation, of course. And I know there's been a certain degree of communication that there's legal propriety involved there. But is there anything more you can tell us as far as the existing public notices have gone out? Are there any updates to the situation beyond the transition taking place?
The transition is taking place. It'll be effective by October 1st. We are, in addition to approving that transition that the sheriff decided upon, we have also been giving notice to end service contracts from like food providers and medical providers and so forth. So that's all in place. Those are happening as well. We won't, after October 1st, we won't have people spending the night in the jail.
Okay.
So people that are being arrested will still come in, get booked, leave, and go to probably the Nez Perce County facility. And they might spend a few hours, they might see a judge, depending on what happened, what the situation is. So we expect that to happen starting October 1st, unless something happens before and we have to transition earlier than that. But that's the drop dead date. New fiscal year, it helps us with planning and so forth.
That makes sense.
There are a lot of issues, of course, with that facility. It's quite old, as we all know, more than 50 or so years old, and then the design was from, say, 20 years before that. So it's really not the best way to have people housed. And of course, we need to think about the safety of our employees, the safety of all of those sheriff deputies that are working in the facility. We have to think about the safety of the people who've been arrested, the inmates. We can't just treat people unethically, either whether they're an employee or an inmate or anything. We need to make sure that we're doing the right thing by all humans. And so that's going to be the best step forward. And so I feel good about making that decision, our decision was to support the sheriff's decision.
Right.
But we've been kept apprised of the various issues for some time, and we regularly inspect the jail, so we are very familiar with the conditions of the jail and need to make sure that we're treating people well. So that's the best way it's going to be.
And I suppose, would it be wise to suggest to folks who are still interested, still have their own questions about the subject, would it be wise to forward those questions to the sheriff's office or to the sheriff himself?
Well, the sheriff, constitutionally, the sheriff is responsible for the jail, the operation of the jail and so forth, if it has a jail in all counties of Idaho. Counties that do not have jails are still responsible for people who are incarcerated but held somewhere else. And so there's a lot of issues with just making sure that people are taken care of and handled well. So yeah, the sheriff is the great place to start with that communication, but we're paying attention to all of that and making sure, we're not going to leave the sheriff out there hanging. It's all a team. We're all together on it and not seeing any issues. And it's not just, this isn't just an issue with the 3 current commissioners. For the last 10 years, we've been talking about the jail. And so that I've been there, and I'm sure the commissioners before that were talking about the jail. I was on the city council in Moscow in 2008 when we were talking about the jail with the commissioners. And so, so it's been a while. This isn't like a new thing. And, it's a jail built in a basement. That's not how modern jails are constructed. And a modern jail would be a 64-bed facility, minimally, and with the ability to double that size. They're usually built in pods of 64 beds. And so and I think it probably makes sense for us in the future to very seriously look at how to replace a jail, a permanent jail, for Latah County and what that would look like. And it would probably be a 64-bed unit with the possibility of expansion again to 128.
And that would be a new separate facility?
It would be a new separate facility on, proper property, amount of property, probably, something like 15 acres. I mean, there are proper modern ways to build a modern facility that treats people well and that is safe and is useful for the long term. And it requires really good planning, and it requires also a lot of funding. And so right now we don't have decision making at the state level that would allow us to have a good funding source. A good funding source would probably require a local option tax, which would enable a local government to put a bond up that would say, hey, voters, what do you think about, building a new facility that might be a combination of sheriff's office, jail, for example, and how much would you be willing to see us raise in sales tax, an additional sales tax. So that's what a local option tax does. So whether we can do that or not, it's going to be up to the voters.
Yeah.
There's also bonding authority and those kinds of things, but it's hard enough for voters to agree to build a school.
Fair enough.
And so building a jail is one more step beyond that in many people's thinking. So we want to make sure that we're figuring out something that makes the most sense. And so anyway, it's something that'll be down the road, we'll be looking at, and we'll be hoping that we can put forward to people to help make happen. But it's a long-term funding decision that will be there.
Changing the subject a little bit, I've been asking the other commissioners who, of course, are both new this term, how their first several months of being a commissioner have run. You being the senior commissioner of the 3, how has that onboarding experience been from your perspective?
I think it's been going well. I mean, it's in addition to 2 new commissioners, we also have a new deputy clerk. And so there's a whole lot of training going on in the basement of the courthouse. Everybody's learning new jobs, and we've been doing so since the beginning of the year. And we've got folks, 2 new commissioners that, you campaign on one idea, and then the reality of governance is, of course, always different than the reality of campaigning.
Right.
And so suddenly, everybody has to like focus on the specific issues that are on the agenda and what we're doing and how to make decisions about those things. And then as I said, having a new deputy clerk is a whole nother piece, because I only know what I know from being a commissioner. I don't know where the files are kept in the vaults, in the storage. I have no idea where the computer files are. So it's just making sure that all the things are in place so that when we get to a meeting, we're ready to go and making things happen. But it's been really fun. And we go to trainings and we get to spend time together and do things. So
well, hopefully it does prove an enjoyable time.
Yeah.
Just one last question for you, and that is for the citizens of Latah County, whether they're super invested in county politics or not, what are some things that they can be keeping apprised of going into this next month?
Oh, sure, yeah. So probably the biggest thing is we're in the budget process. So the budget process really starts in February and March, when we reach out to all the department heads and elected officials asking for what they would like to see funded starting October 1st, which is our next fiscal year. So we've had all the presentations from all those elected officials and department heads saying, this is what I would like to see funded. We also have a separate sort of capital planning committee that's been going through that process too. So we've heard all those requests, and in the end of July, beginning of August, we're going to start having the conversations about, the workshops where we're going through and saying, well, they want this, but is that the highest priority? They want this or they want that, or what's the highest priority? How much are we gonna, what kind of cost of living increases are we going to do? All those kinds of questions are going to come up. And so that's what we do for the next really 2 months until we get to the actual published proposed budget. So it'll be published somewhere around the middle of August.
All right.
And then from there we will have a hearing on the actual proposal. And probably lots of ideas between now and then. So people can come to meetings. We can, and we can hear what people's comments are about what they'd like to see in the budget or not. So,
well, I guess to the citizens of Latah County, stay tuned for that. And thank you so much for your time,
Thank you.
Commissioner.
Thanks so much. Enjoy.
There you have it, folks. I hope to have more conversations like this with county leadership going forward. As always, we'll have the relevant links posted with this video, and if you have any questions that you'd like me to ask the commissioners, please send them my way. I'm Aidan Anderson with Moscow Report, and this has been an update from Latah County. We'll see you next time.